Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's Fit for Learning webinar. We've got a really good topic for all of you today in talking about how to balance saving for the future, saving for retirement, along with paying down your debt. And we have the opportunity to work with thousands and thousands of individuals, and I think that this is one of those topics that continues to come up. And when we're asking for feedback on topics that people want to learn more about, in some way, shape, or form, we're talking about how to save, how to manage your debt, how to build that into your budget. So we're really looking forward to kind of walking through some tips with you today and to discuss some best practices as well. My name is Kyle Bingham, and I'm the Managing Director of Financial Wellness. And joining me today is also Kenji Noguchi. He is one of our financial education consultants. And again, we're excited to kind of share with you some of our own insights and knowledge into how we can help all of you as you're kind of navigating through your situation and discussing and focusing more on this idea of saving and then also simultaneously paying down your debt as well. Here's a look at today's agenda. We're going to talk first about just what are some of the factors that you need to consider as you're going through this process. We're going to talk about good debt versus bad debt. What does that mean? And then ultimately, how are you going to kind of start to prioritize the order in which you start to kind of attack or pay down those debts? We'll talk a little bit about whether or not you should be using your savings as a way to pay off some of that debt. And we'll also talk a little bit about debt consolidation and, if and when a person is in a situation like that, if it may make sense to do something like that. And then lastly, which I think is probably one of the questions that all of you came here today to get answered, is how do you balance saving for retirement and paying off debt at the same time? And with that, we're going to go ahead and kick things off with the first question of what factors must I consider while balancing the need to pay off debt with saving for the future? And Kenji, I'm going to kick it over to you. Why don't you talk to us a little bit more about some of the considerations that a person should have as they're starting to look at their situation?
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. And hey, everyone, thanks for joining us here. A lot of factors, right? When we think about debt and saving for the future, but I'll list out here a few of the main ones that I want everyone to take away. So very firstly, when you're thinking about your debts, I want you to understand, what is the interest rate, right? What type of interest rate do I have? Is it higher than what I might be able to earn on my savings? If it is, maybe we might want to focus on paying off that debt first. Again, your investment returns there, those certainly matter. What's your assumption when you're investing? Are you just sitting in cash? Do you have it invested within the market? What does that look like? But more importantly, we have to understand our type of debt too, right? So some of our debts, like high interest credit card debt, those can accumulate and become burdensome. And typically it's a priority to pay off those debts to avoid paying more interest over time. The next thing that we want to take a look at is our financial safety net. Do we have an emergency fund for these emergencies? What happens if our dishwasher goes out, or if our home floods, whatever it may be? Do we have an emergency fund to cover those things? Because if we don't, generally what do? We tap right back into those bad debts like a credit card to cover the expense. Another consideration I might have you think about is employer contributions and retirement saving incentives. A lot of the times our companies will, if we're fortunate enough, have a great company match, and we can add our savings fire to that, fuel to the fire, if you would. But also there's tax considerations. If you're doing pre-tax contributions to a retirement plan, are you capturing those specific tax benefits? Interest maybe on a mortgage might be deductible for you as well, as far as debt goes. All of this said here together, we want you to consider your short-term and long-term financial goals. How's that going to impact your cash flow immediately? And more importantly, what's that psychological benefit that's going to apply to you here? Some people might find peace of mind in paying off all of their debt, even if, our math and numbers might suggest prioritizing saving. So consider your emotional well-being and how it impacts your financial decisions of, should I pay more debt, or maybe should I save a little bit more in lieu of that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's great, Kenji. And I think the only other point that I would just add is, and you see that on the screen, how you're going to pay down your debt is not a one size fits all approach. And I think sometimes we get into the habit of maybe looking at a rule of thumb or a general guideline. But as Kenji's kind of outlined here, there's different variables. You're all at different points in your life, different points in your career. And so these considerations that you're looking at, quite frankly, are going to be changing as your own financial situation changes. And so just like any other area of your financial plan, how you're going to balance the saving and paying down of debt, it needs to be personalized. Now, let's talk a little bit about good debt versus bad debt. So Kenji, can you kind of walk through what does that mean and how does a person go about prioritizing which debts to pay off first?
I think it's a good question, and I absolutely love talking about this because it might be subjective to a degree for folks, but I'll give you an outline. So when we think of good debt, what comes to mind, right? Generally, it's a mortgage, maybe for a home that can appreciate in value, maybe even student loans. That could be a good debt too, right? Education that might increase our earning potential, or maybe even if you're a sole business owner and you need to get a business loan to really grow or expand your business. Again, those could be good debts in our eyes. And what I want you to think of it in general is just good debt is any investment that might improve your financial well-being. It might improve your current finances, anything that might move you ahead or appreciate in value. So good debts, absolutely. We need to have them. We love them. And on the flip side, we might have some bad debts too. And I think everyone here probably on the call today would probably agree that credit cards, that's probably the first thing that comes to our minds, right? And bad debts, maybe even beyond credit cards, could be things like title loans, payday loans, any of those higher risk debts, they could be bad, right? And when you categorize bad debt, I want you to think of any of those high interest things where you typically will use discretionary spending for vacations, maybe luxury items, you wanted to get that new watch, or maybe even any other type of expense that is just going to exceed your income. And what do I mean by that, right? Well, if you don't have the cash for it, what do you typically go to? You go to something like a credit or a bad debt. And ultimately, the takeaway here is that when you have a lot of these bad debts, it's going to hinder your financial progress of reaching that financial freedom that we all like to get to. So just to circle back here, when you prioritize these debts, I'll give you all a quick rule of thumb here. And, I talk about this all the time with participants from across the nation that I talk to. And most people just want a quick rule of thumb, like which one should I attack? And what we'll tell you here is that if you have an interest rate on a debt, and let's say it's 6% or greater, you should generally pay down that debt before, saving or investing additional dollars towards retirement. And why is that? Right? Well, we can make an assumption that we might have an investment return, maybe 7 to 10%. If our debt's at 6, well, obviously it might make more sense to save versus prioritize that debt. Now, I just want to make it clear here, right, folks, is, living with debt isn't inherently a bad thing. Most people are going to carry it through their lifetime, and I can even say that with confidence too. It just depends where you are in your lifespan. Maybe you have different goals. If you're a new family, just starting out, you want to buy a home, you just had a child, these debts might carry over, and then you have to get a new car for that child. So most people are going to realize that, we might just have some type of debt our whole life, but I want you to circle back and reflect on, hey, do I have good debt here or do I have bad debt?
Exactly. Great. Thank you, Kenji, for kind of walking through that process. And I think we've all probably been in situations where we are forced to have to cover some type of an unexpected expense, and it may have put us in a position where something had to go on a credit card or some other type of personal loan perhaps that we had to take out. And life happens, and that's something that I know I'm sensitive to, and those of us that work with individuals. And so really what we want you to be able to do is that if you are in a situation with some of that bad debt, let's really start to build that into your plan of how we're going to start to kind of prioritize and pay that off and to be able to move forward. And now with that, what I'd like to do next is talk a little bit about the question of, should I use my savings to pay off debt, and does it make sense to consolidate all of my debt? And I think the big point here is, how would you define your savings, right? Are we talking about maybe a unexpected expense of, say, $500, right? And because of that, we can then take maybe from our emergency fund, or maybe you have a separate savings account and you're able to grab the money from there in an effort to be able to cover that expense. Or even if you maybe had a small credit card balance or something like that, where it's not a large amount of money and realistically you could draw from one of those accounts, take that cash, but then be able to replenish it pretty quickly. But then on the other side of the equation, you know, some people are viewing their savings as their 401k account, their other types of retirement accounts. And I think we need to be really mindful of those considerations that Kenji talked about earlier, that, you know, when we are starting to dip into things like our retirement savings, then we're in a position where we're not able to take advantage of that compounding interest anymore, and we're lowering those balances. And especially when you're in good market conditions, I mean, it could really make a difference. And again, a lot of this has to do in large with where you're at in your life and in your career. Are you just starting out, or are you nearing retirement? Because that's also going to have an impact on, you know, how much you might dip into your savings and what types of accounts you're going to be using. I think this goes hand in hand with this idea of consolidating all of your debts. And I'm sure all of you have had the chance or understand the basic idea of what a debt consolidation loan is. And oftentimes what happens is a person has the ability to take a debt consolidation loan, and oftentimes they're going to pay off maybe 1, 2, 3 credit cards, right? And that enables them a lot of times to have a much easier plan for how they're going to pay that debt, right? It's structured now, it's one fixed payment. Oftentimes it's going to be a little bit better of an interest rate than what you might be paying on those credit cards. And so in and of itself, it could be a good thing. And Kenji alluded to this before also, and I think it's really important to note here, when we're doing things like consolidating debt, it's not necessarily addressing the root cause of the debt in the first place. And I think for those of you that might be looking at potentially consolidating as a part of your debt pay down or repayment strategy, just understand that I think what some people fall victim to is, after they've taken out that loan and now those credit lines are open back up, right? We've got zero balances on there. The question is, are you going to be able to maintain that discipline to not use those credit cards and to not run that balance back up? And again, it's not to say that it couldn't serve a purpose, but we really have to be mindful of and think about, you know, do we have the right behavior to be able to take advantage of some of these specific consolidation tools and pay down strategies that are out there. Now, I want to segue into this question about saving for retirement and paying off debt. And I want to give each of you just some really easy next steps that each one of you can take. And I'll also want to provide to you an example of what this process is going to look like. So if you're at a point where you're not really sure what the first couple of steps are going to be for you to start this balancing of saving and paying off debt, the first step is to build in some consistency. And you've heard, for those of you that have been attendees with our webinars for the last couple of years, everything really comes back to just having a general awareness of your overall situation. Do you have a budget? Are you tracking your income and expenses? Do you have a good general idea of the money that's going in and the money that's going out? And as a part of that, you want to make sure that you're continuing to pay those minimum amounts on all of your debts. Because if we're trying to pay down debt, we definitely don't want to get into a position where we default on a loan, or on one of our credit card bills. And then we're talking default interest and other fees and penalties potentially. So just start simply by making sure you have a budget and making sure that you're making all of your payments on your debts. Then move into step 2, which is we have to start to build that safety net around us. And a really crucial part of that is starting to build out your emergency fund. That oftentimes when somebody does go into debt, it's usually a result of some type of an unexpected expense. And granted, you're not going to be able to always cover every one of those emergencies or unexpected expenses, but the emergency fund can start to act as a buffer. And I know for some, this may feel a little bit discouraging at first, but I can promise you any amount that you're able to start to contribute towards that savings account, it will significantly start to make a difference. And make sure that you're automating this so that you really don't even touch that money, that each paycheck that hits your bank account, even if it's $20, $30, $50 going towards that saving account each and every pay period over a couple of months, now you're going to have hundreds and eventually thousands of dollars that you've accumulated. And now you're in a position to be able to absorb some of those different unexpected expenses that may come up. So we've got the emergency fund, we have a goal now, we're chipping away at that. The third step is we want to get and take full advantage of any company match dollars that you have access to. For most company matches, you're getting an immediate 50% return on your money or potentially a 100% return. So getting those company match dollars is another one of those higher priority items. And even if you're just contributing up to that point where you're getting that full company match, now you've got this money that's going to be working for you. You're going to be taking advantage of all of the compounding interest and that growth that's going to be happening within that retirement account. Once you've gone through those 3 steps, the 4th step now is let's really prioritize what other debts we have and let's tackle those and let's use that preferred method that is going to provide the most benefit for you. And you've heard things like debt avalanche, debt snowball. There's a number of different methods that you can look at, but the point here is we want to check the box on some basic kind of foundational things within our budget and within our savings and within our debt management, and then we can start to tackle those additional debts that we may have. Here's a really kind of simple but impactful example of what that might look like. So you're looking at a typical budget allocation. So this is a person that after taxes, they've got $4,000 a month. We're using the 50-30-20 model, and some of you have probably heard about this before. I think this is a great method to illustrate how you're going to get to your saving strategy. And the 50-30-20 works just like this. 50% of your income is going to go to your needs, right? Things like insurance, utilities, mortgage, minimum debt payments. 30% is going to go to your wants. That's going to be things like maybe going out to eat or entertainment. And then 20%, which I've highlighted here, is going to be that savings bucket or that debt repayment bucket. And so I think a lot of times what people struggle with is getting to the point where they actually see a dollar amount that they're working with. And so I think if you can look at what your monthly income is and then apply the 50-30-20 method to it, you'll be able to very quickly get to a dollar amount that you're working with. So this is how much is available in this particular example. Now there's $800 that this person can use to either save or a combination of saving and paying down debt. In this example, this person has a credit card and also has a student loan. So now we'll get into what does the actual strategy look like? Well, this person doesn't have an emergency fund yet, so one of their goals is I'm going to take $200 from each one of my paychecks to be able to start to build out that emergency fund. And I'm going to do that for the next 12 months. After that goal, that checking that box of building out the emergency fund, the next thing is they want to save for retirement. They're also going to contribute $200 a month towards their retirement. This ensures that they're getting their full company match. Now, step 3 is we're going to tackle the highest priority debt. In this example, it's going to be that credit card, because that's a revolving credit line and it also has a much higher interest rate than any of the other debts that this person has. And so they're going to attack this pretty aggressively. You can see here that $400 a month is going to be going towards paying off that credit card. That's over and above the minimum amount. And then approximately after about 12 months or so, that person now is going to have that credit card completely paid off. Once that has happened, that final step is now we're able to pivot again. And now we're going to look at what's my next goal? Well, I want to continue to build out my emergency fund even further. So now we're going to take an additional $200 and continue to build out the emergency fund, or maybe take $200 and pay down that student loan faster. There's a variety of different ways that we can go about doing this, but the point here is to get all of you to a point where you're actually looking at dollars and cents, and you're actually able to set specific goals for yourself. You heard us talk about it last month, the SMART method, right? Having a goal that's specific. It's something that you can measure. It's actionable, and it's going to be a goal that has a timeline, or it's time bound. And this process enables you to be able to do all of that. One other quick point that I would encourage everyone to do, and this is something that a lot of folks tend to do around the beginning of the year. Each year you can go to freecreditreport.com and get your credit report. And I think that as you start through this process, grabbing your credit report and just getting a look at what all the different debts are that you're carrying, what all is being reported to the credit bureaus. And this can be a good part of this exercise, to look at your debts, to be able to prioritize those, build that into your budget, and then start chipping away at how much you're going to be saving, and also the way in which you're going to be paying down your debt. Kenji, I'm going to pass it back to you for a moment here. Any other quick thoughts that you have on how to help in creating that personalized approach to saving and paying down debt?
Absolutely. And, I really like this slide, and I like what you're getting at here. And for everyone on the call, I think one thing I want you to take away here is that the golden rule in savings, right? What is it? Well, it's pay yourself first. You have to pay yourself and allocate some of these savings towards it. And, over time, that's going to grow your bucket. It's going to give you a more fundamental financial plan. I've seen a lot of scenarios too here, just to give everyone a feel for it and give them some perspective. There are some folks who, let's say they have 20K in a savings account and they have 20K in credit card debt. Well, I think instinctually we all think, well, why not pay it off? You have the money to do so. Well, those same people might just run that credit card right back up. On the flip side, right, maybe some folks are very successful. They can pay it off, and they clear their credit card or high debt obligation, and next thing you know, they have all this extra income per paycheck to start rebuilding that emergency reserve that they have, or investing for that next goal in life. But what we most commonly see, I'd say, is that personalized mix between the two. You have to find that good balance, and I'd say most people do this of, they'll get their paycheck, they'll have their retirement deferral, never see that money, right? They'll allocate a little bit to their emergency savings, and then it comes to those debts of, all right, what's my game plan of how to attack this? You have to be honest with yourself and know your behaviors when it comes to those finances. Are you going to refrain from, tapping back into those high debt instruments, or, are you going to be on a good track to say, I'm going to lock these credit cards up. Once I pay them off, I'm not going to touch them. I'm going to go cash only, right? I might start pulling cash off of every paycheck and pay in cash. So again, it's totally subjective of how you approach it, but I want you to keep in mind that generally the best option for most people is to pay themselves first. Save a little bit, attack those debts, and then we can always readjust goals as you progress.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great segue, Kenji, and I think that we are definitely here to be able to help you with this process, and so we're going to be sending a follow-up email. You'll be able to go back in and rewatch our webinar today to be able to go back and take notes or just revisit maybe one of the sections that we talked about. But we're also here to help you to kind of walk through that process. So if you'd like to just sit down and have a complimentary one-on-one with one of our consultants, we're more than happy to do that. You can grab your phone and just scan the QR code right there, and then you'll have access to a calendar that will allow you to do that. And again, we're here to be able to answer any of these questions that you might have surrounding the debt that you're carrying, surrounding the way that you're saving, and then really trying to marry the two together and make sure that you're confident that you have a good plan for attacking your debt, but that you also have a plan for how you're going to be saving, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. And I also wanted to remind everyone about our next month's webinar, Taxes and Investing, Tips to Become a More Tax-Aware Investor. Year over year, this is one of our most highly attended webinars. It's going to be tax season. It's top of mind for a lot of people. So if you haven't had a chance to register, scan that QR code right there and make sure that you're a part of that. We're going to be diving into just some of the different tax benefits of different accounts that you might be contributing to, the ways that different investments are taxed. And so I think that a lot of you would find a lot of value in next month's webinar as well. And with that, folks, I just want to thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to be here. As I mentioned, we are here to help. We're here to be a resource for you. Please feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to go back and rewatch our recording of today's presentation, and also you'll be directed to our YouTube page, so you'll be able to go back and look at all of the previously recorded webinars that we have conducted as well. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your day, and thanks again for jumping on. Bye-bye.